Now that we are done in Adobe Fresco, I want to first clean up our file, do some house cleaning that is, on our work file before I push it through Creative Cloud to Adobe Illustrator on my desktop. So let me show you what I need to do. So yes, I drew out all the swatches for the base color fills and also for the shading values that we created. Those we don't need because we have everything in place, as you can see in the fish artwork. So I'm just going to go ahead and select those layers and just delete those layers like this. And then below this, if I go ahead and hide the bottom layer, this is just a preview. We don't even need that. I find it a little odd that it's this way in Fresco, but we don't need it. So we're just going to delete that because when we open it up in Illustrator, you'll see a white background. You won't see a checkerboard like you would in Photoshop. That's because Fresco is primarily a pixel-based program. Even though we were using it, this is completely vectorized artwork. We're going to go ahead and push this to Illustrator now. So once I clean that up, now I don't want to flatten this file because I want to retain all my layers as they are. And each one of these, again, if we go here, are labeled because we want to be able to know what we're looking at when we move to Illustrator. So once I have it cleaned up like this, and if I would have done this to the very first movie where I showed you images of the drawing process, I'd remove those as well before I pushed that to Illustrator. And when I saved out all of these movies, by the way, that are in Adobe Fresco, the raw art is provided in the exercise files, so you can see each stage as it progressed. So in order to push this to the desktop, we'll go up here to the export icon, which is to the left of the gear, and we'll click that. And here is open a copy in Illustrator for iPad or desktop. So we'll click that, and we want to do it for desktop. Now, if you want to push this artwork over to Illustrator on the iPad, you could. I don't use Illustrator on the iPad, to be completely honest. I don't like it. It's okay for certain things, and maybe I'll do a movie showing those certain things, but for the most part, I just stick with Fresco to do vector drawing because their blob brush kind of blows when you go to Illustrator on the iPad. So we're going to send it to Illustrator on the desktop, and I would just click this and an indicator would come up. So if we click this here, you can see how it's processing. Now, normally I wouldn't do this because what I've just done is it's going to pop up on my workstation, which isn't even in the booth I'm recording in. It actually might show up on this machine as well. And so it says document sent, and there we go. So this message on the screen is what you'll see when you push something from Adobe Fresco to the desktop, and it will give you the controls. As I stated, you'd want to select convert layers to objects and import any hidden layers and click OK. But I'm not going to do that because I've already done that. So we're going to go ahead and click cancel. I just wanted to show you how it does that automatically. So we'll click cancel. This is the exact raw Fresco artwork that we did just that. We moved from Fresco to the desktop, and it looks pretty good. Now, you can see in context of the overall proportions, it's pretty small. It didn't feel that small in on the iPad, but that's because we're zoomed in. So I'm definitely going to enlarge it for the final format that I'm putting together. But I wanted to walk through some of the things you should be aware of because you created it in Fresco. Aesthetically, it looks fine. If we zoom in, it looks exactly what we saw in Fresco. The one thing you have to remember is Fresco is RGB mode, not CMYK. So this is an RGB file you can see up here in the label of the file itself. So If you prefer working in RGB, that's fine. Then you won't have to change it. I'm going to convert it to CMYK because I prefer working in CMYK. So if I do an art print or something like that, I know it's going to look exactly the way I intend it. I wouldn't want to use RGB when a printer prints in CMYK. And for me, I prefer CMYK, but that's just me. You work the way you prefer to work. So we're going to take a look at it through a few things now. In general, if you look at the artwork, aesthetically, it is fine, but let's go to keyline view, and that is Command Y. Look at all of these paths. This is just kind of nuts. And this is why I say Fresco does not create clean artwork. What do I mean by that? Well, let's go ahead and go out of keyline mode. And we're just going to focus on the line work alone. And let's zoom in. Does this look great like it did in Fresco? Yeah, it does. But if we go to keyline, every single time I touch the screen to ink, it creates a shape. And it doesn't fuse those shapes together. So in a previous DVG lab, I did the artwork of the figure's head with the flowers around it and the crown on top. And I ink that inside of Illustrator using the blob brush and a Wacom tablet. And you saw how it would fuse those shapes together as I drew them. Well, Fresco doesn't do that. It doesn't fuse the shapes together. At some point, I hope they do that because this is the result you get. And this is exactly why I didn't want to just fill these white shapes, because then I'd have to figure out how to pull them out and not get confused with all the shapes that are making up the line work. That is the main reason why I didn't do it. Can you do that? Yes, you can, but it's going to make cleaning up a file a big headache. And so that's why I didn't do that. The other thing I want to point out, if I go ahead and select everything here, and we go to the left here, I use Astute Graphics plugins. You can see we have 18,000 anchor points. Now, if we turn everything on and I select everything, we have 41,000 anchor points. That's a bit absurd. You wouldn't want to use this in a print file this way. So we're going to clean it up. Now, I figured out how everything should look and feel in Fresco, but I'm kind of going to deconstruct it now and build it clean in Illustrator. So the first thing I'm going to do is just isolate the line work itself. Right now, it's 18,010 anchor points. So with all of this selected, it's just one color, black filled shapes. I'm going to go down to let's go ahead and pull out the Pathfinder palette, and we're just going to go Unite, and it's going to fuse all those shapes together. And you can see we immediately cut off 11,000 anchor points by doing that. So if we zoom in on this now, we can deselect and go to keyline, you can see it fuses everything together. And this is what I wish they would bring to Fresco. It doesn't have to do it by default, but give the user the choice to do it before they even move it to Illustrator, to select the layer that you have your line work on and just unite it to create this, because then you could fill these shapes, and you know what? It'd make the process a lot more fluid and streamlined, and ultimately create cleaner artwork. Why they don't do that, I have no idea, but that's what they should do. So this is how I've cleaned this up. Now, if you wanted to clean this up even further, because 7,744 is quite a bit, you could, but in this case, I'm really not going to do that. But if you wanted to, you could go to Object, you could go to Path, you could go to Simplify. And once you're inside Simplify, by the way, if by default Simplify shows up as a real thin floating palette, just make sure to turn Retain My Latest Settings and directly open this dialog. I don't know why they made it an extra step. It's kind of annoying. But this is where you could simplify it. So if I decide to say, let's simplify the curves 90% and let's smooth it out 5%, then we can cut off approximately 5,000 more anchor points. And if you think this looks better, then by all means do that. I kind of prefer not letting an algorithm decide my aesthetic because I inked it that way in Fresco to establish that. So I'm going to click cancel, but I did want to show you that. So that's another way you could clean it up. Once I have it at this point though, I do want to clean it up even more. So I'm going to go to object. I'm going to go to compound. I'm going to go to release. Now you might have to ungroup it. You can see ungroup here. So I might ungroup it once and now everything's ungrouped. Now, if I zoom in on this, and another thing I should point out is it puts a different color on each layer. And if you haven't noticed by now, I never have multiple layers colors. I use one consistent layer color. So if I go into this, I always use medium blue, and I change everything to medium blue because if I'm selecting yellow and it's a yellow highlight color, you can't even see your path. Now, I wish by default in a new document setting, I could tell it to always use this layer color, but there is no way to do that. And I'm told the reason why these are this way is because cartographers love to use these layer colors to denote certain information on certain layers. And I get it, but I wish it gave the user the ability to do that. So anyway, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to select the outermost shape of all these things like this. Oops, that's the inner shape. Select the outer shape. This is another issue with Illustrator. It's hard to select at certain zoom ratios like that. So these are the outer shapes. And if I just go here, we're just going to select a color so you can see what I'm doing. So if we turn these to this blue color and I unite those, now everything is this blue color, and if I push it to the back, all these are just islands sitting on top. And this is where I'll go in. Now we're losing some of the information like on the eye. If I select this and this layer and this, and I select the background and I push all these to the back. Now I have an F key to do that. If you don't, you'd have to go to arrange, send to back. Notice I have F4, so I can just hit that because we have elements like this on the inside here. And this is where you'll have to go in and start selecting some of this content. So if we go here and we color this like that, you can see we have our eye here. So I would select these two and go minus front. Then I'd color this one white. The blue will ultimately end up being a black. So we'll go ahead and select white for these. And this is where anything that's like a donut shape, you'll have to go ahead and select these shapes in order to get access to all the artwork you actually created, like this one. And we'll do that. It's not hard. You just have to pay attention because it's easy to forget that you have some of these shapes in here. Like that. So that's all I'm going to do is go in and do that for all of those shapes. But ultimately, what I'm going to do is all these interior shapes here, deselect the outside shape, all these interior shapes, in this case for the fin, once again, hard to select at certain zoom ratios. Kind of frustrating. You can see all these over here, the same issue. Let's go ahead and just adjust that as well. We'll push that shape to back. It's always easier to adjust the colors so you can see the shapes on top of it. So I'd take all of these and we go ahead and unite them. Select this shape, minus front, so all those are there. Then I would select all shapes that sit on top. The blue, which will ultimately be black, will be white. So all these shapes, interior shapes, everything that falls on the inside of the artwork, all these would be white. And ultimately, this outline is going to become a black. So what we end up with is white, little islands of white floating on a sea of black that's formed like the fish. Now, I'm not going to walk through all that, and it takes some time to do that. But once you do that, then you have everything to go. So I'm going to switch over to this file because this is where I've already done that, and I've already sized the artwork up so it's in a little larger format. But I also wanted to include the drawing stages of this creative process within this Illustrator file, since that was embedded in a Fresco file, and it's a little harder to access even though I saved out Illustrator files of it. So once again, the thumbnail sketch, the refined drawing, this is to really define the shape that I was going to ink in Fresco. I would take this, scan it into a flatbed scanner so I had a raster image I could move to my iPad, place into Fresco, and then this is what I inked on top of. So you saw all that process. I'm just reiterating it here. And ultimately, once I cleaned up my vector artwork, push from Fresco to the desktop, this is what I end up with. I have all the outer perimeter shapes of the bubbles and the fish itself. This is going to be black, and then everything on the interior are all of these white colored shapes. So that's why I did it that way. Now, this is where I'll look at a printout I made of my iPad art, which already had the colors figured out. And I went back and recolored everything, but I did utilize some of the shading shapes so I wouldn't have to recreate those in a desktop environment. So if I turn this off, here's the red shapes, and we'll go ahead and turn on the teal shapes and everything else. I'll just pull it. It kind of looks cool without an eye. We'll just turn on all of these like that. And so you can see how the shading, let's turn off the highlights right now. We have all that shading. The red's the only one without the shading. So let's go down here to the red shading layer. And you can see all these shapes are what I had drawn out in Fresco. They're just sitting on their own layer now on top of the red. And if I go ahead and select this, these are all united using the Pathfinder. And now I can just simply select the red shading value that I created. I believe it's this. No, that's not it. Well, if I can't find that, we'll just recreate it. We'll go here. And since we are working in CMYK mode, so I did change everything to CMYK, and we can go here and adjust the values. I'm going to go to half, so we'll go to 45 here, something like that. And then this one will be 44, half value again. And then on this one, the shading value, we'll add 15. So if you think like traditional media again, you would desaturate the color and you'd add black if you're shading something. So this would be the shading value. Now that we have that, we can add it to our palette, make sure it's a global color. I can select these shapes that I originally drew on the iPad. I can select the red shapes. These are all united as well. I'm going to copy this, Command-C, Command-F. So all I did is make a copy of those, and then I'm going to select the shading ones, and then we're going to go intersect. So everywhere they overlap creates the new shape. Now, once you do this, if you go to the appearance panel, it's going to turn it into a group. So this is where I'll turn it back into a compound. And I have an F7 key set up for that. If you don't, just go to Object, Compound, Make. Notice I never have to go here because I have F7. Now that I have that, I can get rid of the outline, go to the fill color, select the shading value I have, and now I can go to transparency. And on transparency, I don't want the full value 100, I want it 70. And I'll go ahead and set that. Then I'll select multiply, and that'll create the shading on the red. So that's all I did for all the values. Once I converted everything, cleaned up the file, also just took the same exact shapes I drew in Fresco for the highlight, and those are sitting on top, and I think this looks pretty cool. Now, what I want to do at this point, and the reason why I didn't want to do a background in Adobe Fresco is because I think there's an easier way to do it. Actually, move it down here like that. We're going to add some cool effects. So we're going to turn on the background. I want this to be square since I'm going to be posting it on Instagram. And so I'm going to turn on this layer, and we just made a copy of the black. So if I select this layer, you can see it's just a copy of the perimeter shape. It's just outlined here, and we're going to offset this. So I'm going to go to Object, Path, and we're going to go to Offset, and we're going to select Round for mitering, and we're going to do this 20 points. Like that, so it offsets. Let's go ahead and get rid of our original path. We don't need that. We'll use eyedropper, sample the background color, which is blue. And we're going to go to color, and as long as you're using global colors, you can take that color and you can do a tint of it. So in this case, we're going to do a tint of 60% just to halo it, and I think that looks pretty good. And the only reason I did that is because we're going to create ripples and continue that kind of haloing effect as it goes out to create this kind of background. And I think that looks kind of cool. So the next thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and add some texture to this. Now it's organic already because of the line work we hand did in Fresco, but I think it just needs a little more. And so this is where textures come in. So I'm going to show you this texture. This is a texture I created with an old toothbrush. So don't throw your toothbrush away. This is a bitmap TIFF. So it's not even vector, and it doesn't need to be. Bitmaps are just reduced down to white and black pixels, and it's going to default to black. So if you look at the fill, there's no fill, no stroke. That's okay. All we're going to do is align it. Let's go ahead and pull our palettes up a bit, and we're going to go to align, and we're going to go center the document. So you can see it's just these little flecks of color going over everything. And we're going to, now that I'm looking at the black, this is at the point where I was getting ready to do this, and I go, you know what? I don't like black in the flex, but I'm starting to question if I like black here as well. And this is why I like moving it to Illustrator, because I like doing color exploration. And this is where I decided, you know, maybe it'd look better if it was like purple. And I tried this, and that's kind of a muted, actually, that's a muted gray. I meant to click on this one. Purple, and it's not dark enough. There's not enough contrast there. And then I go, what if I do this darker blue, which is just part of my new document profile? And I go, that's close, but again, it needs to be darker. So I darken the blue, and I go, oh yeah, that's it. That's what we want. We want the dark blue. Now, if we go back to that texture, I can select this, and because it's a bitmap, I can color it any color I want. And this color, this time I'm going to color it the same color as the outline of the fish. And then what I'm going to do is I want it to be not 100% value. We're going to do 30% like that. And I think that looks good because you can see it's interacting with the color underneath it. If you wanted to, you could use multiply, but in this case, I don't think we need to. I'm going to go ahead and click on this layer, and you can see all I've done is I've used the same splatter. I just rotated it 180 degrees, and this one is just colored white, but instead of 100% value, we'll just do 30. And you can see it adds a nice kind of granular texture, speckling that is, through everything. And I think that looks pretty good. So that's how I'd use textures to kind of enhance artwork like this that already has kind of an organic feel, even though it's completely vector created. Now, the next thing I want to do is, and I showed this in a recoloring movie previously, the recolor tool, because once you have a design like this, now I should point out, it won't do anything with these bitmap textures. The recolor tool will kind of just ignore those, but anything vector based, it works great on. So what we're going to do is take a copy, and I have that on its own layer because we're just going to compare this to what we had before after we do it. So this is the same artwork, sans the textures we added. And I'm just going to select all of this. And by the way, one thing that's good to do is you might want to, I always forget this command, so I should have wrote it down in my notes. Let's go to View. I believe it's Command H. Yeah, hide edges. So when you're using the recolor tool, it's selected, but it doesn't get in the way with all those anchors. I normally like that selected, but not on this type of artwork. It just is obtrusive to viewing the artwork. So once we have that selected, you'll get the recolor tool. If I had those bitmaps in here and I had everything selected, the recolor tool won't even show up because it doesn't recognize those elements, and so it won't do anything. So in this case, we're going to open this up, and it loads, it kind of loads the gamut it detects in this. But what we're going to do, because I've had success with it before, is I'm going to go here and I'm going to go down to natural. Was it natural? No, earth tone. That's what it was. Earth tone. I'm going to select it and boom. This is just like my favorite color mode with this tool now. I think this just looks so cool. Like I would never have colored it this way. And so I kind of like that. And so if you want to save it, just click on the folder and you can go save all colors or save prominent colors. We'll just save all colors. That's fine. If you save prominent colors like this, it'll create a color group, which is kind of nice. And so I think that looks pretty cool. So if I click out of it, that's how quick you can do a color exploration to get additional colors. Now on this one, I might go back in. This is where I'll turn off hiding so I can make sure I have it selected. And I might select something like this, and just to see what the blue would look like if I add it back in. And I'm going, ooh, I kind of like that. So it's a lot of fun to play with the recolor tool. And if you compare it to everything, let's go ahead and turn on all of our artwork. This is recolored and then the original. So a drastic kind of depart from it. Actually, if we move this down under the textures, you could get those textures in it as well. So that looks pretty cool. So when it comes to final vector artwork, Adobe Fresco allows you to create a more organic look and feel than the pen tool provides in Adobe Illustrator. Now, if you have a Wacom, you can do the same thing all in Illustrator. You don't even need an iPad. You don't need Adobe Fresco, but you do need a Wacom. But as you say, it's not, as I would say, that is, it's not exactly clean art by any means. You have to spend a bit of time optimizing and cleaning it up once you push it to the desktop. I think personally, I'll stick with just using Adobe Fresco for inking vector line work and leave my coloring to Adobe Illustrator on the desktop. I just prefer that way, but I distinctly wanted to show you how you could do that if it doesn't matter if the file's clean to you or not. To me, my OCD tendencies need to clean it up because I might want to use it in another way, and I wouldn't want to have such a kind of sloppy file to work with. So in essence, they both work together in that respect pretty well. But for this course, I wanted to show you it from both sides of the vector equation. I like how the final art came out, and I hope you learned some new things by watching this course so you can take them and apply them to your own workflow. Remember, if you have any questions about what I documented in this movie, please leave a comment or ask a question, and I'll be happy to answer it. Thank you for watching People of Process. And as always, I hope this content helps you to improve your own creative process.